episode of Unzip, Reboot and Live URL podcast. Today we have Professor of Behavioral Economics, Duke University, Dan Ariely. How are you, Dan?
Actually, as you know, I'm in a complex state. Um, my mother just passed away.
Yes, I
Um,
heard that.
yeah, and not only did she pass away, the standard of sickness and mourning and so on, but she chose that it was time to end her life, and she did it in a very brave way. She felt that there was too much suffering and so on. And of course, that's both a relief because she didn't suffer that much and she was in control and kind of uh, passed away in the way she lived. But it also brings up questions. Should she have waited 2 more days? Did we have all the discussions we could have had? Did I do everything I could have? So um, it's very complex. As a psychologist, also I look at that both from experiencing the mourning and the sadness and the appreciation and so on, but I also try to examine
So it was
these.
not a natural death, it was like on her will. Is that you were saying?
So she basically wanted to accelerate it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So stop taking medicine or whatever. I'm not
yeah,
going into details into that. Okay. Okay. Rest in peace and yeah, hopefully you will come out, with all her blessings and all her learning.
yeah.
Okay. All right. And you are the first person I am talking who got Ig Nobel Prize. And for high priced fake medicine is more effective than low priced fake medicine.
Yes.
Can you tell a little of that?
Yeah. So when I was in grad school, I went to the Ig Nobel Awards. And what the Ig Nobel Awards are is for research that first makes you think that scientists are crazy and doing nonsense. But when you think about it more, it says, "Oh my goodness, this is a really deep point." And I remember going there as a grad student and saying, "Oh my goodness, this is great." I'll give you one example. There was a physics professor that asked the question was, does the toast fall with the butter side down more often? There's this saying. And, when you think about it, it's like, is this a question for a physicist to deal with? But it was actually a question about how objects that have uneven distribution of weight move in space. So there was lots of these things that in the beginning you say, why is it? What is this good for? And then you say, oh my goodness, this is really interesting. So the project that you mentioned is the one we got. It's about the fact that expensive placebos work better than cheap placebos, and placebos are a really fascinating idea. Placebo is about the fact that our mind can change our physiology. So imagine that you take a pill and you believe that it's a painkiller. You believe it's a painkiller. If you take a candy, nothing happens. But if you think it's a painkiller, your body secretes a substance that is a painkiller. It's endogenous, it comes from the inside. We have all of these mechanisms to reduce our own pain. But you can't close your eyes and say, please, please, please give me some pain relief. But if you take a pill and you believe that it's a painkiller, you will secrete a painkiller. So you actually get a painkiller, but it comes from within your mind. It does within your brain. It doesn't come from the outside. And we wanted to demonstrate that effect, but we also wanted to examine other things that influence the beliefs, including price. And what we saw that is if you give people the same placebos, but you tell them it's expensive, they're actually more effective. And we used it to change the perception of electrical shocks. So people got electrical shocks, and we measured how painful they were. And it turns out that the expensive placebos made the electrical shocks less painful than the cheap placebo. So that's still very important research.
Right.
One I like a lot. Yeah,
Oh, nice. So, so you research in many areas, and one of them is how irrational ways people behave. And today we will talk about one of those irrational ways, which is lie. Okay.
yeah,
Almost every day, not every moment, but every now and then we lie, white lie, black lie, dishonesty, whatever. So we will talk around that today. So first is why we lie.
yeah. It's a very good way to ask this conversation to start this conversation on lying. Why we lie? Because the answer is lying is a representation of a more bigger question, a bigger way of dealing with life. And let me give you the following story. So there's a story in the Bible that God goes to Sarah, and God says, Sarah, you're going to have a son. And Sarah laughs. Sarah said, how could I have a son when my husband is so old? And God says, don't worry, you'll have a son. And then God goes to Abraham. He says, Abraham, you're going to have a son. And Abraham says, did you tell Sarah? And God says, yes. And Abraham says, and what did Sarah say? What did Sarah say? And God, in the story, God lies. God says, Sarah said, how could she have a son when she is so old? Now, the religious scholars wondered, how could God lie? And what they concluded was that it's okay to lie for peace at home.
Okay.
Now, let's think about this. We have many human values. We want to say the truth. We don't want to offend people. We want to make money. We want to promote some goals. Sometimes all of these things point in the same way. What happened when some of them is pointing the right way? Telling the truth and not offending Abraham. What happened when it's telling the truth versus making less money? So really the discussion about honesty and dishonesty is really a discussion about how we resolve conflicting motivations. You go to the store. Here's an experiment we once did in Holland. It was my book launch on dishonesty in Holland. And we basically asked the people in the cashier. At that time there was more cash. Now there's almost no cash. We asked people to pretend that, imagine you came to me to buy my book on dishonesty, and you give me 30 euros, and the book is 25. And instead of saying you gave me 30 euros, here is 5 back, I would say, oh, you gave me 40 euros, here is 15 back. And now the question is, would you say it? Would you say, oh, no, I gave you 30? And what would happen if I said, oh, you gave me 50? Here is um, here's 25 back. So what we found is that a lot of people cheated, and actually, as the amount of money went up, the number of people who cheated went down. We'll come back to this in a second. But when you think about dishonesty, you say, I want to be honest, but it's also nice to get more money. How do I play with those two forces? How do I balance them out? Because we don't always lie, we don't always cheat, but how do we balance those? And it turns out that the standard theory of economics has a very simple solution. We do a cost-benefit analysis. What do I stand to gain? What do I stand to lose? What's the chance I'll be caught? How much time will I get in prison? and we decide. It turns out that that's not a good theory of how people decide. It's a good rational theory for maybe a machine to make a decision. but it's not a good theory for human being. And when it comes to human beings, it's mostly about rationalizing our actions. So, for example, I'll describe to you a different experiment. There was an experiment we did with vending machines. Imagine a vending machine, and it says 75 cents per candy. And there's a big sign that says, if something is wrong with the machine, please call this number. And you come and you put the money and you press on the button and you get your candy. But you also get all the money. Because you don't know it, but we programmed the machine not to be on 75, but to be on 0. So the machine gives you all the money back. What would happen? So what happened is lots of people keep on going and they take extra candy. Nobody called the number, which was my phone number, so I knew. And nobody took more than 4 candies. Now, why would not somebody just empty the whole machine? It turns out that we don't want to think of ourselves as bad people. So what we do is we cheat up to the level that we can rationalize. So people said to themselves something like, I remember another vending machine that took my money and didn't give me a candy, or gave me an old candy. And in fact, that other machine is a close relative to this machine, and I'm only fixing my vending karma. So people could take 2, 3, 4 candies and still rationalize it. But if you took 10, you would say, I'm a thief. So it turns out that the psychology is that we could cheat a little bit and still feel good about ourselves. That's really what is going on. So the theory that we find about what is happening with cheating is that everything that is increasing our ability to rationalize is also increasing the level of cheating. So everybody else is doing it, nobody would suffer, this is standard, all of those things that help us rationalize also help us cheat to a higher degree.
Wow. So we cheat more to ourselves than others,
You know, the thing about cheating to ourselves versus others,
or is it like, can I call it self-deception?
yeah. So self-deception is slightly different than cheating to ourselves, but every time we cheat, the question is, are we fully aware that we're cheating and we're doing it intentionally only to cheat others? The answer is no. Most of the time, we try to cheat, but we ourselves don't think of ourselves as cheaters. So we cheat in a way that we ourselves are convinced that we're not cheating. That's the most common way of cheating. Like
Is it, sorry,
if you look at people on their online dating profile, people are slightly taller, slightly younger, slightly way less, all kinds of things like that. And if I ask people, I said, is your online profile for your dating on your online dating profile correct? People would say yes. I say, okay, let's look at this. I say, oh yeah, I was like this 2 years ago, and I'm planning to be like this in 6 months from now, and so on. So we think that we're being more honest than we really are.
right. So is there any individual morality comes into it, or that morality line is also pretty much standard?
Very good question. So, the tests that we usually do are abstract and new. For example, one type of experiments we do is we give people a die, a 6-sided die. Say, roll the die, and we'll pay you whatever it comes on. It comes on 1, we'll give you $1. 2, we'll give you 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, and 6. But you can get paid based on the top side or the bottom side. So choose one, top or bottom, but don't tell me. So imagine I say, are you ready? Yes, you say yes. I say, pick top or bottom, and don't tell me. You picked? You say yes. Roll the die. And let's say it came with one on the top and five on the bottom. And now I say, what did you pick? Top or bottom? If you say top, you get $1. You say bottom, you get five. So you say, I picked top, I picked bottom, and we do it 20 times. And what do we find when we do it 20 times? We find that people are extra lucky. People pick the high side. I'm joking, right? People cheat a little bit. In the 5-1, if it's one on the top and five on the bottom, people say bottom more often. Right?
Right. Okay.
Now, from 20 times, you would expect that half the time people would choose the high side and half the time we choose the right side. What people do is they say, "Oh, it's 5-1. I'll change my answer." Um, so so we find that people cheat. People are correct 12, 13 times. Lots of people cheat a little bit. This is kind of the standard answer. Now, our experiments are like this: general, abstract, the first time people meet them. And when we do this across countries, we find that the result is quite similar. We do experiments in countries that have very high corruption, like Kenya, and countries that have very low corruption, like Sweden. And we don't find very big differences. But in real life, what happens is that people have silos. So when you think about our experiments, they test the basic ability to cheat a little bit and rationalize it. But then when we come to a society, there are all kinds of social rules. And because of that, different societies cheat differently in different domains. For example, in South Africa, it's very common, at least it used to be very common, to bribe policemen who caught you speeding. People would not be embarrassed about it. They would tell you at dinner, "Oh, I just got caught by a policeman. I only paid 100 rand. It was so cheap. I managed." So what happened is that different countries have the same backbone, but the social understanding is different on different domains. Um, for example, and let's use India as an example. When I was in India many years ago, downloading illegal software was not considered immoral. It was the way people behaved. When I was in China, photocopying books was perfectly reasonable. So I think that the backbone of humanity is kind of the same, but then we come to a culture, and the culture says, yes, that's the backbone, but in this particular behavior, paying taxes, cheating your customers, bribing a policeman, and so on, these are the norms. So the norms sometimes override our initial kind of humanity, and they give us a new standard for what is acceptable and not acceptable.
Okay. So is that the reason? I mean, because every place have different rules, that good people end up doing dishonest things in groups?
So first of all, I think it's very hard to be good people, um, because life is very tempting. If you think about the story of God and Abraham and Sarah, if you think about telling your friends what you really think about them, being honest is very, very tough. And by the way, to some degree, it's getting tougher, because if you work with the people you care about, are you going to tell them the truth? If one of your friends he's an artist and he's producing terrible art, are you going to tell him? Right? It's very tough. If you work at a company and your whole group can get a bonus if you produce something extra, are you not going to cut corners to get to that? So we tend to think that good people are protected because of goodness, but the reality is that to stay good, we need to work very hard. We need to really think about conflicts of interest. When we when we encounter conflicts of interest, it's very hard for us to override them. So um, if a good friend of yours tells you that they want to marry somebody and you think that that person is a terrible person, are you really going to tell them? Very, very tough. So the thing that we need to really think about is not so much good people versus not so good people. We need to think about how restructuring the society with how much temptation to be dishonest, and how we helping people not succumb to those temptations.
So,
And from that perspective, it's important to keep on thinking about our temptation. It's a bit more like a diet, and it's something that we have to struggle with it all along. It's not like, oh, you take a module on dishonesty and you're fixed. No, it's something we have to keep on thinking about.
so if the bigger umbrella, or like doing things for bigger good, or morally or ethically whatever that things are going bad, so when you are thinking you are actually doing good, it's easier to trick people or
First of all,
tempted.
when you think you're doing good, it's easier to trick yourself. So I'll give you an example. Imagine that experiment I described before with the dice. Okay, you throw the dice and you do it 20 times and you get to make money. And we said people cheat 12, 13. I mean, people guess the high number 12, 13 times. People cheat a little bit. Okay. What happens if the money is not going to you, but in the beginning of the experiment, I tell you to pick your favorite charity in the world, the most important cause that you can think about, and all the money you would make today is going to that cause. Would people cheat more, less, or the same? What do you think?
Less.
People cheat more. Why? Exactly what you said before. If it's for a good cause, like we said with the vending machine, I can cheat two, three, four candies. I can't cheat five, right? If it's for a good cause,
I can
I'm a
stretch
bit
it.
more liberated from my moral shackles. But here's a more interesting version of this. We did this with a guy that worked for the police force on lie detectors. And we connected people to a lie detector, measuring the galvanic skin response and so on. When people were lying for themselves, the lie detector could predict that they lied. They lied, and the lie detector, not 100% of the time, but it could catch it. What happened when people were cheating for a good charity? The lie detector couldn't detect it.
Wow.
Why? Because people didn't think they were doing something immoral,
Right.
right? Imagine Robin Hood. Do you think, you remember the Robin Hood
Yeah,
that
yeah.
would steal from the rich and give to the poor? Do you think that Robin Hood felt bad? No.
No.
Robin Hood probably felt bad when he didn't steal.
Yes.
So when you convince yourself that you're acting for a good cause, then the lie detector is not going to show that you're stressed out. So this idea, and now we're getting more to convincing yourself. The moment you convince yourself that you're doing something for a good cause, you're not thinking of it as lying.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
where do you live in Australia?
Melbourne.
Melbourne. Okay, lots of traffic.
Mm.
Um, when people are late to meet friends for dinner, and they say it was traffic, let's assume that many times it wasn't traffic. They just
Yes.
left late.
Yes. Yes.
um, so, but do they feel bad? No. No, you come to your friends, you bring a bottle of wine, say, oh, sorry, I was late, traffic was terrible. Do you say to yourself, I just cheated? No, no, no. You convince yourself that you're actually doing it to preserve your friends, you're doing it for a good cause.
And people are okay with it also. I mean, knowing, unknowingly, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, people, because the moment you rationalize it, it means you don't feel that you just lied.
So, do we lie more in those kind of societies? Because I'm from India, so where there are greater inequalities or power asymmetry.
I don't know. It's a very good question. It's a very good question. Um, certainly in the animal kingdom, lying in the animal kingdom is very different. But in the animal kingdom, for example, a monkey that is low on the hierarchy, if a monkey finds an apple, he needs to bring it to the monkey at the top of the hierarchy. But they somehow try to hide the monkey, so the apple, so they don't have to give it. So, so I would say that most likely, when a society with more injustice or more perceived injustice, then the people that would feel that there's injustice against them would feel more liberated to be dishonest.
Okay. Because they are seeing
Yeah,
injustice. That means system is also doing
that's right.
this kind of
That's
things
right.
that rationalizes their behavior.
That's right. You remember like 2007, 2008 were kind of complex years. And they were complex years because people did everything they were supposed to do, invest in the stock market, and then the stock market crashed. When we take people who lost lots of money in that period and we remind them that they were like things worked against them, they are more likely to be dishonest. When you take physicians and you remind them how difficult medical school and how long it took and so on, they feel more comfortable taking gifts from pharmaceutical companies, right? It's about liberating people. Oh yeah, yeah, I had to pay so much money, it was so hard and so on. I deserve something. I deserve something back. As I love the concept of karma, but I think kind of there's something that people think about this, saying, "Oh, I was screwed over here. I deserve this." Like there's some balancing that people expect. So I think that's part of the story.
So this corruption, um, is it basically the extension of this small everyday lies, or it's just another different phenomenon?
No, no. Corruption is very different. Corruption is very different. When corruption happens, um, we basically think like criminals. Corruption is a different story. Corruption is basically saying, I've done this knowingly that it's illegal, but I'm doing this, um, but I know it's illegal. So I myself know that I'm not okay.
So there is no greater good or anything like that. It's just
No,
knowing I'm not
that's
doing the
right.
right thing.
That's right. So, so in a regular case, like let's say I go to your online dating website and said, "Is it correct?" You would say yes. You would convince yourself that it's actually okay. If I would say, in your dealing with your friends and so on, yes, I'm basically honest. Corruption, people know that they're doing it, and they're doing it, but so it's a very very different process. Now they still think it's socially acceptable to some degree, right? And that's the problem with the corrupt society. So one way to think about it is to think about guilt. Okay, when you think about acting unethically, most of those things have guilt. If I do this, yes, I do a little bit of this, but I would suffer. Like, go back to my example. Go back to my example of the vending machine. If people took 10 candies, they would feel guilty. Oh, it's somebody else's. I just took. When something becomes corruption, there's no guilt anymore. Like downloading illegal software, it's acceptable in society. So, so for me, the test is guilt. If guilt exists, it means that the behavior we're talking about is in the moral domain. I think it's immoral. If I do too much of it, I'll feel bad about myself. And that's one process. When something becomes corruption, it is no longer in the guilt domain. When something has become a corruption, it's basically saying that's just how business is done, right? Imagine a country where people don't feel the need to pay taxes. Right? They don't feel bad about it. And they don't want to get caught, but they don't feel bad about it. Um, or the example I gave you about South Africa, where people bribe a policeman. They don't feel bad about it. They don't want to get caught, but they don't feel bad about it. So we should separate the ethical domain where guilt and shame are there. And in those domains, we can cheat a little bit as long as we feel good about ourselves. And the real issue is rationalization. Then we have corruption, in which we don't feel guilty at all. And it's just about cost benefit analysis. Will they catch me or not?
Oh, okay. Then what about this fake news? Because this is also kind of a dishonesty or deception. Is it the extension of the same spectrum?
So,
And like what people say, like fake news travel faster or lie travel faster, something like that.
yeah.
So what's this phenomenon?
So, actually, my last book was about misinformation. The book is called Misbelief,
Really?
and
Yeah.
it's about this. And misinformation is a very very complex phenomena. So, but in quick terms, there are many different people who produce fake information. Some of it is coming from people with bad intentions. You know, China, Iran, Russia, right? There's lots of the production of information that is supposed to tear people apart, confuse people, all kinds of things like that. So there are the people who are using the free information around the world on these media as a weapon. That's a very different story, right? These are people who are sitting there and trying to destroy something. They're doing this on purpose. That's a very different psychology, right? Then there are the people who think they're correct, but are not, right? So um, I started writing that book because I was very much attacked during COVID. During COVID, there was a group of people who thought that I helped to bring about COVID, that I was connected with a big conspiracy around COVID, and they attacked me. I got death threats. It was a very, very tough period. Not true, by the way. I was not connected in any way. um, but there were people who were not working for any foreign government. They were just agents for themselves, but they just started believing all kinds of not true things, and they thought they were altruistic. They thought, they thought I'm really evil, and that they're helping um, the world. And then there are the people who naively spread misinformation. Oh, this looks fun. This looks interesting. This is crazy. Let's share this around. But if we link it to dishonesty, I think there are a couple of things. So one thing I've seen with the COVID deniers is that some of them said, I know that this fact I'm producing is wrong, but I'm doing it because the other side lied. So they justified their own lying with the other side lying. So there are certainly things like that when people say, it's a war of information. The other side has more power, they have more things, and therefore it justifies me pushing the envelope. Or people would say, I know that this is, in a standard way, this would be crazy, but it is now accepted in a social norm. Like when people who, so there are things that are more connected to honesty and dishonesty in the world of misinformation, but it's also a more complex phenomenon. There's more there. Um, there's a very interesting phenomena in the world of the social media called shibolet. Um, so there's a story in the Bible. The two tribes had a fight, and after the fight, they settled on two sides of the river. But the river is very shallow; it's easy to cross. So when you meet people, you don't know if they're from your tribe or from the other tribe. How would you find out? So it turns out that the people from these two tribes pronounced the name of a plant called shibolet slightly differently. One tribe called it shibolet, and one tribe called it sibolet. Shibolet and sibolet. So imagine I walk around and I see you, and I don't know, are you from my tribe? Are you from the other tribe? So I show you the plant, and I say, hey, how do you call this plant? If you call it the way I call it, we're from the same tribe, everything is fine. If you call it the way the other tribe calls it, now I know you're from the enemy and I have to chase you away. And we now use the term shibolet for a speech that is about identity and not about the truth. Because when I show you the plant and I say, what's the name of the plant? Do I care about the name of the plant? No. I care about your identity. And if you think about a lot of the discourse on social media, a lot of it is not about the truth. A lot of it is about identity. You know, when President Trump said that the immigrants are eating cats and dogs, did he really mean that they eat cats and dogs? Or did he say, look how anti-immigrants I am? So it's a very confusing speech, this shibboleth kind of a speech. But you can see how it's connected to dishonesty, but it's not exactly dishonesty. But it's the world of information out there is incredibly confusing and very, very dysfunctional. Let me say one more thing about this. As I was working on this book, I encountered lots of challenging questions. But if I asked you 10 years ago, what are the biggest problems of society, this information would not be there. If you ask me now, it would be there. And the reason it would be there now is that it will be very hard to move forward on anything without agreeing. We are very much in a split society. And as a split society, if we can't agree on the basic, how can we act together? How can we deal with climate change? How can we deal with hate? How can we deal with wars? You know, all of a sudden, what's happening between in Russia and Ukraine? What's happening in Gaza? You know, like who can you trust? What do you know? I mean, the whole thing is so confusing. So I think that the deterioration in our information and trust in it is one of the biggest challenges we should work on.
Is it like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it's kind of sounding same like giving a justification of our doing. And in the same spectrum, long-term decision, you always said we are very bad in making long-term decision like exercise and
Yeah.
diet and all these things. So it's the same thing.
No, I mean there are overlaps, but look, this information um, is not exactly like lying because we don't necessarily have a motivation. Like nobody wants to wake up in the morning and believe that Dan Ariely helped the cabal, do COVID. This is not a good belief. When I finished writing this book, Misbelief, I gave it to ChatGPT and I asked it to summarize it in one word. And the word that ChatGPT chose was empathy. And I was very happy with that because at the end of the day, I had a lot of empathy for these people who hated me. And the reason is that they have a very miserable life. If you wake up in the morning and if you think that there's a cabal out there to get you, that is want to poison you and get your kids not to be infertile and so on, it's a very tough life. So when we think about dishonesty, we think about these conflicting motivations and how do we solve them. In the world of information, it's about this information that washes over us and changes us. And what are these changes? What are we ending up believing? And we are very much influenced by this world, and we end up our set of beliefs is very much shaped by what is going on, and sometimes we have very dysfunctional beliefs that are not good for us.
And that belief kind of helping us or manifesting in irrational behavior.
So two things. Those beliefs usually start with some irrational desire. So look, if you're happy and you have resilience, you're not going to say, let me believe that there's a cabal. You're going to be happy. But if you're stressed and you don't understand the world and you want a solution, then you're going to look for something that explains this. And because you're stressed, because something is bad, you're going to look for a bad force. So there's an irrational initial step to look for an alternative theory, and then it makes us unable to process information in a accurate way, and we get going down a slope more and more. So there's lots of irrational tendencies in it. The moment, by the way, that most of your friends are believing what you believe, very hard to change.
Okay. All right. So we are almost end of our podcast. So my last question to you, I know a little bit about your life. I think when you were 17, you had an accident and
Yeah.
burned badly. What happened in that accident?
So the short version is there was a military flare in this place I was in. It has lots of magnesium and it got exploded on the ground and I was next to it. So very hot fire for a very long time and I got burned very badly. I was in hospital for almost 3 years. 70% of my body was burned. This half a beard is because on this side of my face I'm burned, so there's no hair on this side. I have all kinds of other things wrong with me as well.
Right. And um, I know, like when you are going through those like medicine phases, you used to inject some terrible medicine, and you had to vomit around it, and then
Yes.
you convinced your girlfriend with your theory of research to marry you. So, and like you bought a house which was a bit smaller, but you have two kids, and eventually
Yeah.
you thought about that
I
will
I
become.
I would say in general it's kind of nice to you know a lot about me, but in general, I think that social science is really the science of us. We're kind of interesting creatures. We think that the big mysteries is space and molecular biology and what's happening in the ocean, but what's happening between our ears is really very mysterious and very interesting. And I think just looking around, observing ourselves, observing others, thinking about our behavior, wondering if we could do better, is incredibly important. So maybe I'll just say this in ending. The last 4 years, my biggest project has been about end of life. My biggest project in the last 4 years have been how do we think about the last chapter of people's lives between the time that they get a diagnosis of terminal illness to the end of life, and how do we improve that? And I did lots of projects within that big project. One of them is I talked to 100 end-of-life doulas. These are mostly women who help people in the last phase of their lives. And one of the questions we asked them was, what's a good end of life? And they basically said four things. No pain, more doable with modern medicine. No loss of dignity in the body, also we can make some improvement. Surrounded by love, and having a sense of legacy. Now, when it came to my mother, I knew what creates a good end of life, and I was in a good position to try and help her have no pain and as little as possible loss of dignity in her body, and knowing that she's surrounded by love and having a sense of legacy and so on. And for me, this is kind of the key. The key is to understand the human condition better, and then to apply it to our own lives to make things better.
It's an honor and privilege, Dan, to have a
Thank
chat
you.
with you, and thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very, very nice to meet you.